I think one of the greatest compliments that your staff or somebody on your team can give you is by pushing back on an initiative by saying, that's not who we are.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. Throughout this, as we do yet another COVID-related, so here's my story.
Surprise.
Yeah. So throughout this entire thing, in fact, I would say I was probably on the early end of being super into geeking out on numbers and data visualizations and whatnot. So I was probably one of the earlier people to get extra careful, like to be, so which is all just to say, throughout this entire experience that the world is going through, I have almost exclusively found myself on I am being more careful than other people. Like if it was a continuum,
it was a spectrum, right?
If it was a spectrum, I am over there almost in every conversation, which is fine. And you and I have had several conversations and done several episodes on, those awkward conversations of when other people are going to want to come over to your house or give you a hug and you'll have to be like, and treating them like cooties and whatnot. And so I thought I really kind of understood that. In fact, that's part of why we replayed the episode that we did last week, because that was all about that kind of hygiene of speaking truths and saying like what's real for you and all that sort of thing. Well, this past week, for the first time ever, I experienced I think something is okay, that other people that I respect and have pretty much jived with and thought we had very similar perspectives on this whole thing were appalled that another school is doing. And I'll be a little more specific in a second.
Were you safety shamed?
I was internally safety shamed because they didn't know that so here's what happened. So my kid's school, my daughter's graduating from 8th grade, and she's been at that school since 1st grade. My son was there 4 years ahead of her. So we have a long history at this school, and it's a very small school. And graduation is a very important thing there. So I've never really been that into the walking across the stage for kindergartners or whatever. And frankly, even high school graduation, it's important, but the ceremony of it has not felt terribly important to me. I don't know why. It just never clicked that way. However, the graduation at Odyssey has always been very meaningful to me. I go every year. The kids, it's a very small school, so there's usually only like 15 or 20 kids graduating, and they do these speeches. Each kid does a speech. And because it's a school for kids who've had dyslexia, often the speeches are very moving. They're also very funny, but you hear about kids who had very traumatic early years of not being diagnosed and struggling, and then they come here. And so it is very meaningful to me. And so the headmaster and I was part of sort of figuring out how we could do something that scratches the itches that the graduation does, but keeps everybody safe. And we came up with this way to have one family at a time come to campus. The kid can give their speech. We'll video it there. They'll have it set up so the parent can hand them the diploma, and there'll be no contact. Plenty of, it all made sense to me. I was feeling really, really good about it. So flipping through social media, and I see several friends reacting to a county here in Maryland who is, and I don't know what the exact plans are, but they're going to have families come to the school to have the kids walk across the stage for graduation. And a number of people that I have pretty much jived with in our perspectives were appalled and thought it was stupid and irresponsible and were very judgy. And I was reading that post and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my first time on this side. And you said they distance shamed you or whatever you said, COVID shamed, but safety shamed. They safety shamed. I actually had the benefit of not being safety shamed because they didn't know, but it occurred to me, oh my gosh, it just doubled down on this perspective I've had that things are about to get really awkward. Like we are all going to have awkward conversations. And I don't know why this seems so profound to me, but I guess up until that moment, I have only imagined how I would handle the conversations where I am the person who thinks we aren't being safe enough, which I will admit comes with a certain amount of like indignity. I'm like, I'm the one being careful and I'm going to set my healthy boundaries. And I thought, okay, Jody, you also have to prepare to be the person who's like, no, I think we're doing a good job of being safe. And I think this is fine. And you have to set that boundary without that sort of like self-righteousness that comes with the other side.
It's funny because I've heard, I don't remember where, but I've heard that the essence of manners is the art of making the other person comfortable. And
I like that better than just the sort of like snobby propriety that sometimes manners feel like.
No, it's just making other people comfortable so that if somebody gets in late, it's like, I'm sorry I'm so late. The essence of manners as the host is to say, you know what, you're right on time. You're exactly when you should be, just a way to make the other person comfortable. Anyway, Nikki and I went out to a food truck that was in the neighborhood, and it happened to be parked right across the street from our house because we just have woods and stuff back there. And
I'm gonna try and get past the envy that is now in my head. I'm like, you have food trucks that come to you.
Oh, we have food trucks almost every day. Almost every day. So, we went out there, and there was nobody out there except when we went around to the other side of the food truck, there were two neighbors out there, and they looked at us and they were kind of horrified. They're like, I'm really sorry. We ran out here because we saw the food truck and we forgot our masks. Okay.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And it was outside, obviously. So you're not, a lot of people we don't wear masks if we're just taking a walk outside, and we're not in the middle of Times Square. We're just on a trail. So we don't. So anyway, now the manners part, which kicked in automatically, was say, oh, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. But then when they turn to say, so how are you guys doing? And you're like, and I'm physically like backing up, you're like, we're doing fine, as we back like 6 feet. And so
right.
there's this interesting dichotomy. And so in the workplace, and we talked about this in part, when somebody wants an in-person meeting, and I mean, in my case, that can be ordered because of a judge, that, hey,
right.
Look, if I have to sit here in a crowded courtroom, whatever, don't tell me that your personal safety dictates that you remain remote, because I'm here and I value my life too. So, but when somebody or an employee or whatever wants to stay home and they say, oh, well, but I've got a small child, but I've got an elderly grandmother, part of the implication is you can afford to take chances with yours more than I can afford to take chances with mine.
Yeah, I don't think we can even predict how many awkward, weird things we're going to have to think through. And to your point, I was sort of tangentially involved in a conversation where, someone I'm working with, they're very much on everybody's at home. They don't have any intentions of going back anytime soon because it's working. Like there's nothing, they actually explored and developed an entire kind of coming back plan. And then they got to this point where like, wait a minute, if people come back and they have to wear masks all day long and they can hang out in the comfort of their own home and get pretty much just as much done, like why would we come back if like, I don't want to go to work and wear a mask all day long. So they've actually pulled it back. So anyway, that's where they are. And they're doing everything remotely just fine. They got a correspondence from a client who basically said, literally said, because they said, we'd like to do this meeting virtually. That's how we've been doing them. It's been working great. The client said, no, we expect, and then I believe it was like long dash, no demand. They actually used the word demand in the correspondence. Really? Demand, like wow. DEMAND, not like, I'm not paraphrasing. It's not a synonym.
But that's really unusual in any setting in business. That's really unusual. I don't remember a client ever saying to me, I demand.
And as you can imagine, this is why it became a whole conversation. We demand that you come here for this. We are an essential company. Our people are here. We have, we have safety measures in place. We expect to get the service that we have always gotten from you. And that includes you being here for this meeting. And so here was the interesting conversation that we had. So, at a leadership level, you are, like it or not, you are deciding for other people and figuring out it's like being a parent and deciding what's okay for your kids or not. And so, but it wasn't just that simple because let's say their employee who would have to go to that meeting is Bob. So one thing was we said, well, if Bob feels comfortable, well, let's just pause there for a second. Do we know for sure that Bob feels comfortable? So let's pretend for a second that there's a test Bob can take to prove that he 100% feels comfortable and he doesn't just feel pressured to keep the client, either by the company he works for or because he doesn't want to lose the client, because that matters. Like a million reasons he might feel pressure.
That would be a hell of a test to give.
I know, but I'm just trying to like isolate the variables. If there was a way we could know for certain that he truly, genuinely felt comfortable going, as a company, do we feel okay with him going? And do we want to set that precedent where we're going to base it on each individual employee, which then does create pressure? Because if Bob and Sally and Kevin all say yes, and then Mary and, I'm running out of names, Dan, don't want to go, that's going to be pressure. Do we base it on this? And somebody was like, well, it's a huge client. We're like, is that going to be our qualifying criteria?
Right. Because if we can afford to lose them, then they're remote. If they're expendable, then we're remote.
Right. Which just felt,
really care.
I mean, it was just this like really awkward Sophie's Choice-ish kind of conversation where you're having to pick apart variables that you've never had to pick apart before. And that's why the phrase of like, things are about to get super awkward it just keeps hitting me over and over again. And you know what else it reminded me of? I listened to some podcast a while back. I think maybe it was a Hidden Brain episode, where they were talking about ethics and data and all this kind of stuff. And the two stories that stuck with me, one was about what it takes to program or to try and think through the programming of automatic driving cars, because there are all these things that a human thinks through. One very basic one is whether they are prioritizing the safety of the people outside the car or the safety of the people inside the car. And apparently studies have shown that if you're in a car by yourself, sometimes people make different, crisis driving decisions. If they're alone versus if they have other people, they will react to a oncoming car differently or something like.
There's actually, that was one of the things in the Amazon Prime series Upload. They just had this season 1, which is really good. But one of the settings on the automatic cars was you can switch it to prioritize occupant.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. So that's not
the default.
Right. Like prioritizing that. Then they were talking about the things of like, obviously, as a human, if you're choosing between ramming into a group of people versus a group of, I'm going to name a random animal, nothing against ducks, but like ducks, like you would run over the ducks, as awful as that is, rather than run over people. But then they're like, well, is it any different if it's a dog instead of a duck? Or like, what if it's an old person versus a young person?
Well, that's the classic trolley, the classic.
Exactly. Of like having to do all that. And so anyway, it's just, I feel like I just went down like a crazy rabbit hole, but.
No, but I really think that, company policy starts with first person plural. I think it has to start with we as opposed to you. And that's where, because I wouldn't feel comfortable deciding how our company reacts based upon the individual, whether Bob is going to do it, but Lisa doesn't feel comfortable, because I think it's not just probable, but it's inevitable that pressure is going to develop either from higher up or from peers or from your bonus structure, because Bob is going to wind up with better client satisfaction rates or something.
Well, to your point, it's because there is no way you can go back to that very first sort of thought exercise scenario. There is no way to truly validate, separate the variables to know how somebody feels. Like they may be doing it just because they don't want to lose the commission or whatever. Like you can't know. And even if you can. Yeah.
Even asking the question. I mean, it's funny in a weird way. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with Allie, our marketing person, Allie, and she said she was setting up some Facebook ads for me for this online course, and she said, I really was surprised to see that you and I are not Facebook friends. I said, did we never become Facebook friends? And I said, not unless you reached out to friend me, because I would never reach out to friend you, because I believe that if I'm signing a paycheck for somebody. That it's never neutral ground. If I said to somebody else, if I sent them a Facebook friend request, theoretically they could, with all the social awkwardness or whatever, they could decide to ignore it, reject it, or accept it. But if you're signing a paycheck, then somebody has that additional, oh, is this expected of me? Am I supposed to do this?
It's a power structure.
It's a power structure.
Yeah.
So I would never do that, because I think just asking the question, in this case, the question is, will you accept this Facebook friend request? In and of itself makes an objective answer virtually impossible.
Yep.
Similarly, and for higher stakes, do you feel comfortable going to meeting with this client personally?
Right.
I think, it's impossible to get a neutral result.
Right. And to your point, I like so much of this, right back to some of our very first episodes as this all unfolded, and the decisions that you have to make that are harder, more complex. I think we are just being called to such a higher level of leadership with a capital L, like the highest levels of what does it really mean to be a leader? And in this case, I love how you said that, the first person plural, the we. You have to decide what is our policy, and then you have to run cover. You have to be that block, and I can't think of the word, not blockade, but you have to be the person. Like, you can't filter this down to your employees and have them have to say, oh, sorry, we can't do that. Right.
It's the same thing with other scenarios where, let's say that I meant to send out this thing to a client. They were waiting for it, and I meant to send it out. Even if the honest to God truth is that I asked my assistant to send it out, I was on top of it. I asked her to send it out, and she just missed it for some reason. She just missed it and didn't. I think it is, I'm very judgy on this. If somebody in that situation says, geez, Elliot, I'm sorry, but Cheryl just messed up. They go down a notch, more than a notch in my book.
Yeah.
Because I think it's I think, look, we just dropped the ball. I'm really sorry. I should have followed, but I would never put one of my employees out in front to take that bullet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And similarly, just with your example with Bob, we have to decide, are we going to serve the client in the way they demand to be served? Okay, well, that's a we decision. We'll have to deal with that. But I don't think Bob makes that decision. I don't think I make the decision to ask Bob.
Well, and here's something that just occurred to me that I hadn't thought of until now, which is kind of my other point with this. We can talk about it all we want, and we are not going to think of all the ways that this is about to get super awkward. Because let's say as a company, again, we're making the assumptions that Bob is going to be super relieved that you say, nope, we're drawing the line here. And even if we lose the client, it's da-da-da-da-da. Well, if you work in a kind of company where Bob gets commission and it's a huge client and you're telling him he cannot go and therefore the client is going to leave, you're going to have a very upset employee on your hands, potentially. I mean, or maybe not. Maybe you'll have a very relieved employee who said, thank you, because I didn't feel comfortable going. If it's not a thank you, if it's you just took X dollars out of my pocket, what are you going to do about it? We are all going to have to up our chops on good boundary setting and just talking things through, talking it through with Bob, talking it through with the client. There may be something in, this isn't something I normally need a reminder of, but right now on my desk, I have this little sticky that says, ask questions and be curious. Because I found myself getting into a little bit more no, this is what you have to do, more answers than questions. And it is never more powerful to get to the bottom of something when tensions are flaring and when it feels like you're heading in the direction of some kind of conflict or conflicty sort of feeling thing. If I can back up, or at least in my experience, if you can back up and just get really curious about what that is. Somebody said to me the other day, whenever somebody acts in a way that you don't understand, if you sort of squint your eyes and look for the commitment in what they're saying, they are committed to something. They are throwing their commitment behind something in that action. And if you can be curious and figure out what that is, you can get to the bottom of maybe a different solution. I don't know, with that client story, like, oh, go ahead.
But I think that the commitment has to be collective and not individual, what that commitment is. Because, and we did an episode on company culture where we were talking about, I think one of the greatest compliments that your staff or somebody on your team can give you is by pushing back on an initiative by saying, that's not who we are. Because what that says is there's a we. That's not who we are. There's an identity. There's something we bought into. And to your point, yes, maybe Bob would be upset that we put this large client relationship and therefore part of his holiday bonus or his commission at risk. But I do think the essence of leadership is to put a stake in the ground and say, this is where we are. And never more important than in the pandemic. I think that when the ground is especially tricky, to loosen the ties that bind you is I think so counterintuitive as to constitute a colossal mistake.
Yeah, and I think the other piece there is it's a really important piece in all of this, because I think it will be another place that there's a temptation, which is to get the temptation to look at these things in a binary way. And I think it's why the value of curiosity and questions is so important, because my initial reaction to that client saying, we expect no demand that you be here, was to react to that negatively, like, how dare you tell us what to do? But if you can pause and be curious for a second, it's like, okay, curious, you are an essential company. You've been doing this for a couple months. What are your procedures? What are your criteria? I mean, for all I know, they have those like 6-foot bubbles that people climb into and then can roll around the office and never touch or breathe the same air as another human. I'm being a little bit silly, but for all I know, they have criteria that Bob would be safe going, and then we can talk about it. So I think as a company, as you're deciding what is our we, and what are our ties that bind, and what was the phrase you not that's not how we do things, that's not who we are. Like, as you decide who you are and what you care about, I think it's also important to resist the urge to make everything a yes or no, but decide like those nuances of, we are committed to this level of safety for our people. If you meet that level of safety, we will consider it. But then it does have to wrap in some kind of, even if a company did have those bubbles or full PPE setups from top to bottom, that doesn't mean your employee is going to feel okay about it. And which is the whole point of this episode, is this is going to be complicated and awkward, and it is going to ask of us, I think, just a higher level of curiosity and communication and boundary setting and leadership than we've ever had to have before.
And I think you're right. It is a facet of leadership, because whenever you're presented with all of these variables and heightened variables the way we are now.
Yeah, but higher stakes. Yeah.
Higher stakes the way we have now. It's so much more important to decide exactly who you are and where you stand. That's the function of leadership, to put a stake in the ground and say, this is where we are, because otherwise you're just going to be buffeted by the prevailing winds, whether that's client demand or this new scenario that evolves or whatever.
This thing we didn't think about, and
Yeah, you've got to stand for something. So then all your decisions emanate from that.
I love that so much, because I'll be honest, I have, a couple years ago, I won't go so far as to say I stopped doing facilitations for like mission statements and vision statements, but I find them 99% completely useless if it's some phrase that nobody ever leans back on to decide. Like, if you can't hire, fire, make decisions based on your mission, vision, values, then it is a waste of everybody's time to get together and decide those things. But I feel like now, and I don't know if we call it mission or vision in those contexts, but these are the times where you have to decide who you are and what your values are and what you're committed to and how you decide.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.